Middle School Chamber Orchestra, and they rehearse once a week after school. We have two pieces for you tonight. The first one is called Dance Scenario, and the second one is the Latin piece called Mambo Incognito.
I'm very excited about tonight and this presentation. I've been following this research for quite a while and never really thought we'd be able to secure somebody from the team, and we were able to, so I'm very happy about that, from the Children's Hospital Harvard team. So tonight we have Jenny Zook. She is an avid flute player and singer she's been an avid flute player and singer throughout childhood. She went on to receive dual degrees in music education and cognitive science from Case Western Reserve. Her fascination with how music affects the brain led her to complete a master's degree in mind, brain, and education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Jenny has contributed to several research studies in the laboratory of Dr. Nadine Gabb, otherwise known as the Gabb Lab, at Boston Children's Hospital, exploring the relationship between music, language, and the brain. Jenny is now a doctoral student at Harvard, a clinical trainee in speech-language pathology at Mass General Hospital Institute of Health Professions. She is currently investigating brain structure and function as related to musical training and the potential for music to serve as a remediation tool for individuals with communication disorders. So not as only is she a neuroscientist, she is a musician, she's a music educator. You have the whole package. So thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you all for having me this evening. I'm really excited to share some of our work with you. And tonight I'll mostly be speaking on associations between musical training, executive functioning, and the brain. And I'll explain more about executive functioning in a minute here. But I wanted to acknowledge, as Chris did before I start, that all the research that I speak of today from our lab was conducted in the laboratory of Dr. Nadine Gabb. I'm very grateful to have her as a mentor as I work towards my PhD. So to start, in the spirit of the talk and the interest of our crowd, I thought I would just highlight the fact that I started playing music when I was 9 years old, playing the flute, and I had a fun time with my mom looking through some old photos this weekend, getting ready for this talk. So I just thought I'd share some highlights of the Memorial Day Parade over in our town of Carlisle, not too far from you, where I grew up in the music education program. We traveled to Disney World with the band in middle school, and I played at the New England Conservatory throughout high school in their preparatory programs, and then went on to study in flute, primarily in my music education degree. So music has been a big part of my life and absolutely motivated every step I've taken along the way. And with that being said, I wanted to start by what I think brings us all together here tonight. I think all of us have felt this power of music in some way, some shape or form. And I've certainly felt it as a musician myself, and this is what originally motivated me to study music education early on in my path. And I was just thinking it'd be nice to start setting the stage of what we all find to be the ways in which music has an influence on us. So for example, I think we'd all agree that music has a very powerful impact on our emotions. I feel I've been emotionally moved by music in ways that I couldn't describe having felt in any other situation. And with that, it's the opportunity for social engagement and inclusion within a group and an act where everybody's participating in the same manner, no matter whether you even speak a different language and can't talk to the person next to you. Those exchange programs were so valuable for me back in high school. Concord Carlisle went to Japan, and we went there and performed with these people we couldn't even say 2 words to, but then we look at the same music and could read the same language, and I think that's so powerful. And I have a bunch more, but I didn't know if first anyone else would like to share anything they feel music has an influence on. Certainly don't have to, but thought I could open it up.
I feel that music really, when you have that point during the day, it stays constant throughout many years. You build more than just classmates, kind of build more than just friends. It's more like a family at that point. And it's nice to have that constant, group of people with you, even if they're in different class levels. You don't really see them every day.
I totally agree. Thanks for sharing. It's an awesome point. Well, thank you very much for being our one. I'll add to that. I think that music can have a very powerful impact on our motivation. And I think that we can see that happen within the musical setting and also extend to other settings in the academic day. There's so much motivation that comes from that enjoyment of participating in music. And then I also think an important one is what music can do for our self-esteem, psychological well-being, and maintenance of stress and anxiety and all the hard parts of the day. I imagine there are some musicians in the crowd. I'm not sure if you felt that it's just such a relief to get to that music part of your day and forget about everything else and focus in on this really exciting aspect. I like seeing the nods. It's great. So then on a more non-musical realm and more cognitive focus, I also think an important aspect of music is the discipline it teaches to participate in a group setting and go along with what you're being asked to do in music. There's a lot of sustained attention involved in simply tracking through a piece, or sitting and listening carefully to a piece of music alone involves a lot of intention. And with that, the multisensory processing and task switching I see to be an important aspect of musical training. The fact that we're reading this written code and interpreting it and manually pushing the buttons on our instruments as needed, and listening to see if we sound in tune with the person next to us. I mean, how many things are going on simultaneously while you're engaged in music? It's wild. And lastly, the fact that we learn our own symbolic code through musical notation. That's a huge cognitive skill in itself. So with that background, setting us up, putting us on the same page of what we believe in music can do for us. On the research side, the motivation comes from these strong implications for non-musical effects that come from music as we observe through the experiences of musicians, reports from educators and parents, what they see in their children. And so as a researcher, we seek to identify empirical evidence of these traits in order to maximize the impact of the anecdotes and the stories we hear. And therefore, the hope is that this can support and validate music education programs, their significance in our academic world. And with that, as a researcher, it's interesting to consider investigating how musical training has this impact. How is it that it makes the difference for us in the ways that we see? And our particular interest as neuroscientists is to understand how music changes the brain and what in fact is going on in the brain that influences the behavior we're able to do through musical training and other academic requirements. And with that, to also investigate to what extent musical training trains non-musical skills. And this I won't talk about too much today, but I think it's particularly important for considering the implications of music-based interventions as a rehabilitative tool for people with various cognitive disabilities or speech and language disorders or certain physical trauma, anything like that. It spans so many realms. This research has avidly been taking place. It's been sprouting up wildly over the past couple decades, particularly recently. So I wanted to just highlight some of the work that's being done currently. So individuals with musical training have shown enhanced abilities in these domains, and for some research studies, they've shown direct effects in these domains following music-based intervention. So there's work showing benefits in our ability to process speech sounds and discriminate various complex speech sounds we encounter every day. There's been reports of enhanced language skills, particularly greater vocabulary knowledge, evidence of reading skills, benefits in the mathematic domain. General intelligence has been proposed to be heightened in individuals with musical training. And as well, there's a number of studies pointing towards overall improvements in academic achievement, or a tendency to be doing better academically for those involved in music. And working memory is another area that's been highlighted recently. And this is the idea that when we're presented with new information, whether it be a task we have to complete or a new concept we're learning in school, or as simple as learning someone's name upon meeting them, working memory is the ability to sort of keep this new information in mind in real time and be able to apply it right away. So an incredibly important concept for any cognitive task we might have to do. And with that, a further theoretical hypothesis has recently been discussed and published in the literature that I figured was worth mentioning. This comes out from an esteemed professor in the field, Ani Patel, who is local to Boston. He's at Tufts University. And he recently put all these ideas together in this following theoretical framework of the opera hypothesis. And the idea is that he stated that musical training benefits non-musical development in these cognitive and linguistic domains due to these 5 different areas we see here. So first, overlap. I alluded to the neuroscience work that's being done, and part of the amazing thing about it is we've been able to find out that the different brain areas that are actively involved in processes such as talking, listening, speaking, processing language, there's a lot of overlap in those brain regions necessary to do these tasks that are also involved in musical engagement. So playing in music recruits a lot of the same brain regions, and I'll be speaking more about that today. Next element, precision. Music, as any of you musicians know, hinges on success with musical precision. We attend to such careful note patterns within a very specific temporal framework. So the timing is key, and getting the right note at the right time is absolutely inherent in musical training. And Ani actually discusses how that precision is even greater than that we process regularly when we're thinking about speech and what people are saying to us, and the precision involved in saying the right speech sounds at the right time. But very similar mechanisms at play there. And the next idea, as we discussed, is the emotional impact, and I think that is clear in its own for anyone who's experienced a piece of music that's moved them, and a conversation or interaction with a friend or reading a book that's really empowered them. We engage our emotional networks in the same way through these tasks. And then with that, repetition is a key aspect of musical training for any success of acquiring a new instrument. And similarly, repetition is key to learning any new task. And again, recruiting and practicing and repeating with the same brain regions that are involved. And this is what Ani Patel says is the key to inducing changes in the brain, what we call brain plasticity, to allow us to do these different activities better and more efficiently, more effectively, and that in fact they are overlapping in nature. And with that, lastly, attention, since attention is critical to all of these different tasks we do during the day. And if anyone has questions as we go on, please feel free to raise your hand and ask. I don't mean to just stand here and lecture, so feel free at any time. Or any thoughts, if you have personal experiences that relate. So as for my current research work, in a laboratory with Nadine Gabb, we've been very interested in how musical training in childhood is associated with various aspects of auditory processing and how this may transfer to benefit in the language domain, and what the brain structure and function looks like in young children following a short period of time with musical training. So there's a lot of research that's been done in adults looking at the expertise that comes from long-term commitments to musical training, and we were curious to get a look and see how soon can we start to see these effects, how soon are they evident within the brain following starting musical training. And so there'll be one aspect of this I'll discuss most tonight in the interest of time. And one thing we've been debating and considering in our lab is what mediates this connection that I stated about the relationship between musical training and academic achievement. And our thought in our lab was to explore whether executive functions may be a key mediator to this connection that's reported in the literature. So you might be asking yourself, what are executive functions? So let me tell you more about that. Executive functions is a fancy term we use for a variety of cognitive processes that allow for independent, purposeful, and self-regulating behavior. So believe it or not, executive functions are a critical cognitive aspect of pretty much anything we're asked to do that requires any effort. So those higher order complex tasks we must do. So this includes things like task shifting, which I think comes up in a variety of settings. It could be as little as working on your homework at night, focusing really hard on what you're trying to do, and your mom's calling for dinner, so you find yourself having to get up, tell her I need 5 more minutes, and then you sit back down, and it's whether you can even remember what you were working on before you got interrupted and get back to it productively. Another aspect is inhibition, staying focused on that one task you need to do. Maybe this time when your mom calls, it's time for dinner. You just keep working on your homework and don't pay any attention because you're trying to get that done. And that would be the inhibition, not paying attention to the distractors in our environment. Cognitive flexibility is a nice term that sort of goes along with task shifting. It's this idea of being able to attend to a novel new task in live time and acquire it really fast. And I actually think of this most often in a musical sense. When we are sight reading a new piece of music, we prepare ourselves for those times when there's a key signature or a change in tempo or attending to a difference in dynamics. These are all aspects of cognitive flexibility, being able to see a new instruction and apply it right away successfully, and maybe adjust to something else when you're asked in a very time-sensitive manner. And then, of course, sustained attention is a big part of this, and overall goal-directed behavior. So executive functions are indicative of academic and social readiness for schooling, even more than measures of reading and general intelligence and math. So executive function is a key cognitive process for academic success and success in your future. This is part of why we were so interested in this idea, particularly as we've been discussing that so many of these elements overlap with what we know to be the case in musical training. And so overall, they're imperative for academic achievement. And several research studies have been investigating the benefit of various extracurricular activities to support the development of executive functions. Interestingly enough, there's quite a bit in the literature about benefits in executive functions for individuals who participate in yoga, mindfulness training, and martial arts. But interestingly, up until a few years ago, there was really no evidence out there in the world about the connection between executive function and musical training. So this was really our interest within the lab. So our hypothesis that we've been working with is that executive functions mediate the reported link between musical training and academic achievement. So while we see these connections, we think that perhaps executive functions are the elements that are actively recruited and trained through musical training that then lead to all the different benefits that we see from participation in music. So in particular, we expected to find heightened executive function abilities in musicians, particularly on tasks that measure cognitive flexibility and task switching. So for this study, I'll highlight the details. We recruited 57 participants in the Boston area, and these are little rules that come with the research that I'll highlight a little bit as we go through. In recruiting for research studies, it's really critical to try to recruit as similar a population as possible. We want to eliminate any other possible confounding variables. So as silly as it seems, we recruit all right-handed individuals just to eliminate that possible variability of handedness. And it's very critical to have native English speakers in our research so there's no influence of second language acquisition or bilingualism. So this study involved 30 adults and 27 children, and we recruited really strong, experienced musicians. And by that, I mean that our musicians had been studying both in private lessons and group settings for at least 2 years, and our adults were either seeking or had obtained a professional music degree at the time they participated in our study. And our non-musicians had absolutely no instrumental music training or choir involvement beyond the general requirements of the elementary music school program. And so, as I said, we were trying to identify groups that were as similar as possible, and the idea is that we identify musicians and non-musicians, and as we study them on all these tasks, we allow ourselves to identify any potential differences in behavior solely based on musical training. So what is it about musical training that makes these groups different or not? And so with that, we matched them for age, general intelligence, gender, and socioeconomic status. And there were no differences in their general language or reading abilities. So these participants completed an extensive behavioral test battery with us. It's essentially paper and pencil tests or answering questions, listening carefully. They're very patient. The battery I list here takes about 90 minutes to administer. So especially for a 9 to 12-year-old, it's a pretty big commitment on their part. So we did several measures of executive functioning, verbal and nonverbal general intelligence tests, and measures of working memory and processing speed, which is considered to be an important element of executive function as well. And for our behavioral results, we found that our adults with musical training performed significantly better than our non-musicians on measures of cognitive flexibility. We included several different tasks that measured cognitive flexibility from standardized tests, as well as working memory. So that was that concept I mentioned of acquiring a new concept and keeping it in mind for a short enough period to be able to say it back right away or remember it 30 seconds later. And then for our children with musical training, we also found they performed significantly better than our non-musicians on various measures of cognitive flexibility. And in this case, interestingly, not working memory, but processing speed, which is another critical element of executive functioning. So our groups don't entirely match. They didn't show a benefit on everything across the developmental trajectory, but we found a number of benefits in the musical training group over the non-musicians. And with that, we were also curious to take a look at what's going on in the brain, musicians and non-musicians. And so we had them come in and conduct a task switching paradigm with us while in a functional magnetic resonance imaging session, fMRI. So I wanted to take a few minutes and introduce you to the idea of fMRI. Not sure if anyone's familiar. A little bit? Okay, cool, great. So magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, is one of several neuroimaging tools we have available in the research and clinical world now. And it's truly a remarkable approach to being able to take very high resolution images of the brain. And as I pictured here, we acquire 2D images of the brain slice by slice, all the way up and all the way across in a very detailed manner. And that allows us to, on the other side, reconstruct these images to create a 3D image of what someone's brain looks like. And we can use MRI to both look at brain structure, which would just involve somebody participating in an MRI passively. They would just come in and lay down on a bed and relax, and with their head within the coil, which is the area where the brain camera acquires its images, they just relax, and we get a really good sense of brain structure that way. But in this study, we were especially interested in brain function, and that's truly an amazing opportunity within MRI. We can have somebody come in and give them headphones, give them a button press, and with that, they can watch a video or a task and be asked to do certain things while they're in the MRI. And that allows us to be able to see exactly what brain regions are being recruited during a particular task. So I included a little picture here to give you an idea, and I apologize it's not the best photo, but the MRI is the large piece of equipment that you can see in the distance. And I'll show you again closer up in a minute, but the individual just lies down with their head in the coil space while the brain pictures are being taken. And then you can see our control room closer in the image, and that allows one researcher to be in the room with the child or participant, and the other researcher on the other side running whatever task we would like to do with them. And it allows us to look in live time and see how the quality of the brain images are. So one key aspect of acquiring MRI with anyone, you have to stay very, very still. Like any photo, if you started moving while we were trying to take the picture, you'd get a blurry image, and it's especially critical with MRI. And so this is a really wonderful tool we have to be able to be looking in live time, knowing whether we're getting usable data as the person is doing the task. And this is an example of what a really nice structural MRI image can look like. So for a little more on just understanding what this is, we measure functional brain differences actually through investigating and measuring the magnetic properties of brain tissue. And that sounds really fancy and intimidating, but our whole world functions on a very large magnet. And so MRI, the magnetic resonance imaging, is taking advantage of that and using one modality that we can to really get a good look at the biology. And so the person in this little schematic is showing us how you simply have to lie down. You go a little bit into the MRI, the machine, just about to the level of your head. And over time, it allows us to make these wonderful images. And what you see in red is an example of an auditory processing task. And the sections in red and yellow show us the level of activation of different areas of the brain. So it's essentially giving us a sense of what parts of the brain is involved in and recruited during a particular task. And you might be wondering, what does it measure? How does it get this? And it measures something we call the bold effect. And if you don't remember this, it's not a big deal, but in case you're curious, I'll give you a quick 1-minute overview on what the bold effect is. So the idea is that you use a specific area of your brain to perform a task. And in all reality, most complex tasks we use or do use many, many parts of our brain. So as I mentioned, all the areas involved in speech are also involved in music. If you think about it, we're moving at the same time that we're listening, at the same time that we're looking at something. So all the different parts of the brain that are involved in those actions are going to come through in any sort of task involving that level of activity. And so to perform the task, our brains use up the oxygen in our blood in that specific area. So that's just the way that we're able to use our brains to do what we need to. And to get more oxygen, our bodies send more blood to that part of the brain we're using to do that task. So in the end, this oxygen change is what we measure through MRI in order to determine which brain regions are actively working to complete the task. One really spectacular thing about getting to work at Boston Children's Hospital is they have a remarkable setup and space to be able to use child-friendly approaches to conducting MRI. So it's really great. We have a practice area, and I just thought it's worth mentioning. Some of you might be wondering, how on earth do we get young children to stay still during something like this? And so the practice area, this is a fake MRI in the pictures here. This is where we bring all the children first. And it's a really nice way to introduce them to the brain camera and show them how it works and what they're going to do. We have Mr. Froggy and Dr. Monkey, who they can put in the MRI first and get an idea of what it is they're going to have to do. And it's just a really nice way to take away any sense of anxiety and make sure they understand what they'll be doing today. And we set up the whole day in the context of a spaceship adventure. And so all the tasks that they do are actually very child-friendly. This particular game, as you'll see, has a lot of pictures and involves listening, but they're going through a whole spaceship adventure to save me and Mo, and so they complete all our tasks and get to see them get back home safely at the end. So there are some child-friendly motivators there. But in addition, it allows us to make sure they're comfortable, and if they're not, of course, they do not need to participate. One can opt out of the research study at any point in time. But we have remarkable success with this approach, and this is also the chance for children to practice the tasks we ask them to do. So the one I'll mention next, our task switching paradigm, is actually rather complex, and so allowing for that practice time is key to be sure that whatever parts of the brain we're investigating were actually due to the child doing the task, not sitting there unsure of what they were doing. So many important little elements here that make this research possible. I figure it's worth mentioning. And with that, I don't think I said, with this particular imaging task, we only looked at our children in this study, so I'll just be discussing the brain structure and function of the children. The adults were not a part of this portion. So the task they were asked to do in the MRI, now that you have a sense of where they were, how they were set up, and what they were supposed to do, here's the task they were given. In the nature of task switching, this is a rather complex task that's been used in the literature several times before. The idea is that these children are given 3 different rules to follow, and they have to remember them, and all they have to do is apply them correctly. So they're first given a visual cue that they look at, and when they're presented with the cue, they then hear a sound, and they're trained to push a button, either the left or the right button, based on what they saw and what they heard. So this rule to start, the univariate rule, is pretty simple because every time they would see the arrow and hear the horse neigh, they were taught to push the right button. Whereas when they saw the arrow and heard the dog bark, they pushed the left button. Seems easy enough. You just have to remember these 2 rules, push the buttons, and you're good to go. But I mentioned this is only 1 rule out of 3. So the second one, same idea. Now when they see a circle and hear the frog, ribbit, they push the right button. And when they hear the bird tweet, they push the left button when they see the circle. But in the second case of this rule, they would see the triangle and the same sounds, but now the button responses have flipped. So they have to remember that the visual cue is key to know which button to press, then based on which sound they hear. So whereas before, in the bivariate rule 1, if they see the circle and hear the frog ribbit, they push the right button. But if they see the triangle and then hear the frog ribbit, they push the left button. So the rule essentially flips based on that visual cue. So as I said, they practice this task a lot, and it is a complicated task, but I can assure you that all of our 9 to 12-year-olds who participated achieved greater than 95% accuracy. So they really got it, and that practice time is key. So now that we have a good understanding of the method and the task, I'll go ahead and show you what we found. So these are some nice images of the functional results of the brain. On the top, you can see the different regions that are being recruited during task switching in our musicians. And the second column, second row, row B, is showing the activity that's recruited in the non-musicians during this task. And so all of the brain activity that's being actively used during these tasks is shown in red. And as you can see, the musicians and the non-musicians both recruit many, many regions during this complicated task. And in fact, they're recruiting the prefrontal parts of the brain, so it's actually right up here, and parietal areas in the back of the brain, at the top of the head, that are both known to be critical areas for executive function. So these are exactly the regions we'd expect to come through during this task. And in row C, you can see, it's a little hard to see here, that we looked at the difference. We wanted to see what's going on in the brain of musicians more so than non-musicians. And so the little bits of red, as you can see in row C, are those regions that are more recruited and more involved in the musicians than the non-musicians. We are curious to look into those regions even more closely. Oh, there we go. And so this is a large figure, and you don't need to know all the details, but the biggest thing is that when we went into all those specific regions known to be really critical to executive functioning, our musicians, as you can see in light gray, showed much more significant activation patterns in these specific regions than the non-musicians in dark gray. So it's indicated by the higher values in our bar graph in the light gray relative to the dark gray of the non-musicians. Overall, we found that musicians throughout development show enhanced performance on several aspects of executive functioning. And our children with musical training showed increased brain activation in these traditional regions important for executive functioning during our task switching paradigm. So from this study, we were able to conclusively put out there that cognitive flexibility is one construct that is especially linked to musical training. And the one consideration here, as there is with any research study, is that at this point, it's unclear whether this is directly due to the musical training these children did, or whether perhaps it might be a predisposition to study in music. So in this particular study, we had these students come in at one time point, and we looked at what their abilities were right then. And we don't know all that much about what they had really done before and what they'll do after. We just get a glimpse of what they were like that day. And because of that, we can't say with assurance that we know it was musical training that made these kids really great. And a classic debate in the field is really whether it's the chicken or the egg. So a question that's been put out there is it that musical training makes us better at all these skills and tasks, or is it that children who are particularly skilled in these tasks from an early age find that they're successful with music, and that's how they end up where they are? And I would say that there's a lot of longitudinal work that's being done right now to argue that it is in fact a direct result of musical training. There are more studies being built and certainly more that need to be done to be able to counteract that argument. But there's one longitudinal study looking at different aspects of executive function that found immense benefits in kindergarten children following just 20 days of a music-based program. So that's really strong evidence to say that we're probably seeing a very significant connection here that's directly due to musical training. Overall, we feel that our research suggests the musical training may promote the development and maintenance of executive function skills, which may be the mediating factor in the reported link to academic skills and musical training. And with that, I think it's important to highlight that this research is really suggesting that replacing music programs with direct academic instruction may not be the most effective way to boost academic achievement. So with all this pressure these days to figure out how to make the most of funding and funding cuts and the academic school day and all these things going on, it's just important to highlight that we want this research to be able to stand as a clear sign of the benefits and the significance of keeping music education in our school system. And as I mentioned, further longitudinal studies are certainly needed and currently being planned and conducted to further evaluate the developmental trajectory of executive function and cognitive, linguistic skills, speech abilities, all these aspects critical to academic achievement as directly related to musical training. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you feel you learned a little bit of something about the science side of music and neuroscience. And I'd like to just acknowledge the whole lab. These studies are not possible with an immense amount of effort and different researchers involved. So again, the main principal investigator underlying all this research is Nadine Gabb at Boston Children's Hospital. And that's everything I have. Great. I don't know if we want to take a few questions now, or?
I also thought that it would be interesting, since we have a number of students here, who might want to offer their own perspectives on the real life of a musician and how some of this information might resonate with you in terms of whether you've seen this in your own school life. Anybody?
All right, so as you may or may not know, my name is JJ Fidek. I have been elected Vice President of Band this year. I've been a part of the Medfield music program for all 4 years of high school and all 3 years of middle school. And I think I've been, in some way or another, I've had music in my life since I think I was 8 years old. I mean, the presentation kind of speaks for itself, but I can tell you that I'm just off the top of my head, music helps me focus. I look forward to the class. It is a very welcome break from most of my tedious days. It's how I manage my stress. I mean, we're like a family. I can only, I can't say much more than that. Music is pretty incredible, and I know it's definitely had a very personal impact on my life, so. All I have to say.
Abby, did you want to come up? Because I knew you had some thoughts that you wanted to share. Abby Zajac.
I just have a very different perspective about music, since I personally love to sing instead of actually playing an instrument. And one of the things that I remind myself of is that singing helped me to speak better than I've ever had before. It helped me with a lot of diction and how to pronunciate, and also gave me a lot of focus and release of stress. It's one of the most enjoyable things I've ever experienced in my life. I literally just do it every day. It makes me feel more full and whole.
Hi, my name is Brandon. I am co-president of band, and music is really one of those things where it's hard to explain to people who don't play music how much it helps you and how much it more rounds you out as a person. Because at least music for me, it's really like an outlet, and you just really get to like show yourself as a person when you play music, rather than just I don't know, playing sports or something. Because it really uses so much of your mental capability, because you need to I don't know, there's just a lot that goes into it, and I feel like it's just really helped me. I feel more keen as a person. I don't know, I feel like it's just really made me sharp. I feel more focused, and I've been playing music since the 5th grade, and just all the friends I've made, it's just a good group of people to be in. It really puts you in a good place, and it's really, I don't know, the music program is just a really, really great thing.
I don't usually do this, but I'm compelled to do this tonight because I was trying to get my own son to come and say a few words tonight, but we have 2 boys, one in college and one that's a senior in high school. Both of them were diagnosed with ADHD. Both of them struggled with executive function skills since they were in easily 2nd grade. You know, we're constantly getting the phone call from the teacher saying they can't sit still, they're losing their papers. It's, you know, can you please come in, we have to have a conference. You know, they're just all over the place. And, you know, with the senior, some of you know, we spent a lot of time in back-to-back tutors, Spanish and algebra, and, you know, and then we finally hooked him up with the same coach that our oldest one had to work on his executive functioning skills. And once that coach, that executive function focus started, we could get rid of the rest of the tutors, because all the benefits that played in, he learned how to plan his time, he learned how to manage his stress, he learned how to map out different things. And all along, both of our boys played music. And I will tell you that our senior was on ADHD medicine since 6th grade. And since he's been in the jazz band and since he's had a lot more intensive music, he's been off that medicine, because he will tell you that being in the music program and having the intensive time in this music program has allowed him to focus. It's allowed him to be more disciplined. We have seen it firsthand in our own family, and this is why, for me personally, this music program is really, really important. And it's just something that I see day in and day out with kids. And the moment that I start talking about this with other parents, we hear these stories all the time. I've heard them for the last 4 years. We have one alumni who, I wish the mom was here tonight, who said that her daughter, when she was in Dale Street School, had a very severe speech disorder. And once she got really engaged in the music program, that went away. Over a period of time, that went away. And not only did it go away, but being in the music program gave her a sense of self-confidence. It allowed her to believe in herself. It allowed her to be among a group of peers who accepted her as she is. And those peers are the same kids that she's really good friends with today. So that's just, you know, in 4 years of being involved with this program and seeing this research and hearing from all the parents, this is really just, it's really important. You know, we have all the anecdotal, you have the great scientific, and when you put it together, it makes total sense. So, Doug, I don't know, do you want to add anything about what you see?
I have questions for Jennifer. What's next for you in your research? Do you have any
directed research that you're thinking of next? It's unbelievable. You know, how specific, you know, you are, and the whole research, you know, part of it. It's fascinating to see, and it's so great to have that the medical research as well as the anecdotal to put it all together. I think a lot of people who are here live it and understand it, but it's so great to see. You know, I see it year to year, every year with the students as they grow. I'm fortunate to have students for more than 1 year, and I get to see students grow personally in the program, not only musically but personally, which is, you know, as or more rewarding than musical growth. But what's next for you?
So many good points. I'll try to highlight them all, but remind me if I forget something, okay? So one thing I meant to highlight more at the start, and maybe we'll just add to the context here, is I definitely wish to continue to be grounded in music education as I move forward in my career. And my motivation to take this research path truly came from wanting to find ways to support music education and provide this empirical evidence to be able to perhaps have a broader impact on music programs overall, and hopefully give us some interesting answers to the questions that we actually do know to be true, but can understand on a deeper level through these different mechanisms and tools of neuroimaging. And so with that, part of my motivation has certainly been to stay connected to the education side. My master's program was all centered around how we can take neuroscience research and find ways of connecting it to what would be relevant for educators, practitioners, and the ways in which we view child development. And so a personal mission of mine that's very much being fed tonight, thankfully, has been to find ways to not only just publish our findings, but find ways to disseminate these findings and identify the relevance of them in the real world and how they can make a difference. And so in that path, there's been a lot of exciting progress over the past year. we were fortunate to meet Josh Groban, a famous singer, last year at Harvard, and he is actually incredibly on this mission too. I don't know if you've heard about his foundation, Find Your Light, but it's incredible. He tours around the country and will sponsor a music education program, and will have half the proceeds from the concert go towards that specific music education program, and he invites them to perform, and it's just like amazing. He's changing the future of music education programs one by one. And so we have been connecting sporadically on how to make this bridge happen on both sides. It's been a little quiet lately because he was recording a new album, but I'm hoping that things like that can continue to happen, because that's what makes the research real and meaningful. And so on the other side, in my doctoral training, it's been really amazing to be working towards my licensure as a speech language pathologist, because I am very interested in the music therapy side of this and the rehabilitative aspects that music brings to us, as many people have mentioned tonight beautifully. And so some of the work that I've been doing with Nadine Gabb is investigating how this connection between musical training and auditory processing and language processing could be beneficial for those with various deficits and difficulties with auditory processing. And so we've been doing some really interesting work in the realm of the connections between music and dyslexia and reading impairment, and that's very much a growing field right now. And we are currently working on a project looking in musicians with dyslexia to understand what it is about them and their auditory processing skills that may be different than typical academic musicians, but also those with dyslexia who've never studied music, to hopefully start to tease apart what it could be in the musical realm that may better serve those with these sorts of difficulties. And we're also very interested in continuing work in this line of focus with the executive function. The only challenge is our research relies on having the funding to be able to pursue these studies, and the funding in the music and science world is not all that different from the pressures of music education programs. So we've been looking for opportunities, and when something bites, we'll definitely be jumping on it, but at the moment, we're still pursuing those options. So I guess I move forward with a translational perspective in hopes to connect different domains connected in this interest in music from whatever background you might be in, and then also thinking about the therapeutic side of things in the speech and language domain. Yeah. Thanks. Oh, you know, I should just mention, since there are a number of high school students here, it's really awesome to see you all, and I wish I had known this research was happening earlier in my life, personally, and so there's so much research in this area going on, and if it's something that you heard tonight and it really inspires you and interests you, there are always opportunities to get involved and volunteer, learn more about the studies and how they work, and start learning how to do the methods. And so I'll just put that as a plug in there, because you never know what could be possible.
Does anyone here who have younger children have any questions? Younger aged children, that want to ask anything? No? Okay. I just really want to thank Jenny for making the trek out to Medfield tonight, to make the drive and to come and to share all your wonderful knowledge and your passion for this. And it's really been great. So thank you for coming out. We're going to move into our regular Music Association meeting to go through a lot less interesting things that you're dealing with right now. But just kind of our usual monthly business. So anybody that wants to stick around for that, you're welcome to. Anybody that wants to go, you can go. Doug Olson will give us our usual wonderful music director's report. That's the most interesting part of the meeting.
Hi, I'm Larry Kramer.
And I'm Andy Spencer.
We're from Rue 109, and you're watching
Medfield.tv.